Police are investigating grossly offensive signs depicting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as a Nazi dictator, of course, Adolf Hitler. The posters were posted around the eastern suburbs of Sydney over the weekend. That's an area, if you don't know Sydney, that's home to a large proportion of Sydney's Jewish community. It comes, of course, just days after two men were fined $500 each after allegedly tearing down part of a display at Bondi Beach, which was commemorating Israeli hostages taken by Hamas on October 7. Join me now to discuss this, the co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Ryvchin. Alex, thank you for your time. Talk to me about these posters, because I can't imagine a more hurtful image for the Jewish Australian community than seeing any Israeli PM, any politician, compared to Hitler.
Well, exactly as you said, Peter, these were placed very deliberately in an area that is really the hub of Sydney's Jewish community. They knew that hundreds or thousands of Jews would pass through that area and witness this. And this is an area where many Holocaust survivors live, many of their descendants live. And to be confronted with an image like this, particularly the depiction of an Israeli Prime Minister, the democratically elected leader of the Jewish national home, who's now fighting against a terrorist force that has sought to exterminate the Jewish people. It's deeply hurtful, it's offensive, it's abhorrent, but this is where we are, and it's inevitable. When you have weekly protests all over the country where Holocaust analogies are made, where Israel is labelled as the greatest evil in the world, this sort of thing's going to happen. But if these cretins that put this poster up want to look for a Nazi analogy and want to know who Hitler is in this equation, perhaps they should consider which side of the conflict just went door to door in Israeli towns and villages, massacring, raping, burning, torturing as many Jews as they could find.
I'm often amazed at the ignorance of people about Israel and its democratic nature, and even the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And of course, people need to understand, don't they, Alex, that in the Israeli parliament, plenty of Jewish MPs, but there's also Arabs, there's also Christians. I mean, there's a broad church, if I can use John Howard's term there, a broad church of people elected to represent the voters of Israel.
Well, despite the slander that we see from the Greens and from the far left and the Islamist segments of our society, depicting Israel as the greatest evil in the world, as an apartheid state and all of these things, anyone who's been to Israel, anyone who has stood on a street corner for a moment and has observed the citizens of that country, black, white, from the Middle East, from Europe, from all over the world, Arab and Jew, working together in every sector of the economy, in every echelon of power in that country. And in contrast, there are no Jews, certainly not in Gaza, not in the West Bank, under Palestinian control, virtually nowhere in the Middle East. So it speaks to the immense hypocrisy, the ignorance, but the power of the propaganda that has successfully depicted this liberal democracy, this ally, this bastion of Western civilization as something evil and abhorrent.
I played a little bit there before of the Greens in the Senate in Canberra today, but what did you make of it?
Well, the Greens have become the party of showmanship and of solidarity with terrorist organisations, and they've exposed themselves as utter frauds in the last few weeks. So when 1,400 Israelis were massacred with horrific levels of brutality, the Greens could not bring themselves to condemn this without at the same time accusing Israel of war crimes, thereby trying to justify those atrocities which were inflicted upon them. And now, as Israel tries to reassert deterrence, as it tries to save the hostages held in captivity, as it tries to destroy this terrorist organisation that is wreaking utter havoc, suddenly the Greens are positioning themselves as pacifists, calling for ceasefires and truces that will only keep Hamas in power. And this, I think, is what the Greens really want. The Greens, as an institution, support anyone that shoots at Israelis and Americans. They have a deep anti-Western, anti-liberal ideology, and we're seeing it played out today.
Just quickly, Alex, I know that former Prime Minister Scott Morrison is currently in Israel with the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, there to show solidarity. I've just come back from London. In and around the centre of London, there were protests, pro-Palestinian protests. 100,000 people or more were at those protests. Some absolutely focused on the civilians in Gaza. many others not. Horrific anti-Semitic bile coming out of their mouths and on placards, very much wanting to see the destruction of Israel. More are planned for this weekend, which is Remembrance Sunday or Remembrance Saturday it will be in London. And of course, we're seeing all these protests in New York, in Australia as well. How does the community feel about that? Because they seem to be growing in number.
Yeah, they're growing in number and they're growing in the severity of the rhetoric. They're becoming more brazen and audacious and open in their anti-Semitism. And it's quite disturbing for the community. The Jewish people know better than anybody the power of the mob and what a mob can do when presented with the right rhetoric and propaganda and the opportunity. And what we're seeing here in this country as well is every week these people are being whipped into a frenzy of propaganda, incited by clerics here in Australia, incited by the Australian Greens and others as well. And we're fearful for what might happen. But ultimately, we're a society of laws. We have immense faith in our government and our fellow Australians and the police. But certainly these are disturbing and tense times for the Australian Jewish community.
Alex Ryvchin, thank you. Thank you for your time.